Welcome to the BeFUSED podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Davis, and today on the BeFUSED podcast, we're going to be with Dr. Robert Graham, a Harvard-trained researcher and physician that's helping people stay healthy with food. And so Dr. Marotta and I will be talking to him first. And so, Dr. Marotta, I didn't know if you wanted to kick things off and tell people about essentially what you're looking to cover today.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Certainly, happy to provide that, and obviously, it's such a pleasure to have Dr. Graham, join us, as well on today's call. I'm super excited about it. He's certainly, with his own rights, an expert in various disciplines, and so I think, again, I love what I'm seeing. He's one of 50 trained, culinary chefs, in that regard. Obviously, also an internist, and so spent his time as a clinician, and also now as a chef. And I love the whole premise of where the doctor and chef come together really to build more of that wellness focus. And I think it really resonates with me. And so I'm probably not doing it justice, but I'm, as you can tell, very, very excited to just jump right into the conversation with Dr. Graham. So
yeah, so with that, why don't we just bring him in as well and get started. So welcome, Dr. Graham.
Hey guys, how are you?
Yeah, thanks a
for
lot.
having me, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Whenever I looked at your bio and things like that, I mean, there's a lot that I'm sure we're going to cover with regards to how you wound up where you wound up. But can you just provide a little bit of an introduction for yourself in terms of what your background is and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, it's funny, the old adage, how do you know someone went to Harvard?
I don't know. I don't know this one because I didn't go.
So they usually tell you within the first 5 minutes of meeting you.
There you go.
My dad, I come from very humble beginnings here in New York City. And every time my dad hears, a podcast or he hears me speak, he always says, you should tell your story that you're the son of a farmer and the son of an immigrant. It tells you that you are, from the root, a real person. You just didn't go to Harvard, and now people listen to you. But I think that's how I like to start my kind of like my introduction, partly because the whole notion of a farmer doesn't wait for the weather to change. He has to be adaptable to the change, right? If there's no rain, you got to figure something out. And if there's no food, you got to figure something out. And similar to the immigrant mentality, I believe, first generation, my mom's from El Salvador, and that kind of immigrant hustler mentality, again, not waiting for the government to give you a handout, not waiting for the government to show up, and you kind of figure it out yourself. And you're seeing this play over and over again in today's political climate as well, that for thousands of years, both farmers and immigrants have had a tough time here, and it's not waiting for someone to show up to help you out. You just got to figure out how you're gonna figure it out yourself. And I think that sort of mentality are my roots, and that's what I bring to medicine. I think for so long I've seen, being at the front lines of this battle against chronic diseases, we're just shoving more medicine and more procedures at people, partly because it's the way. It's the way hospitals get reimbursed, and that's how doctors get reimbursed. And the more people you see, the more money you make. And very traditional ways of practicing medicine don't believe that. It's in Chinese medicine, an old adage says that the doctor doesn't get its full bounty until the patient gets better. And I'd like to challenge some of our hospital systems to kind of do the same thing. And we're seeing a change in this movement called value-based payment, right, where the value is a premium instead of volume. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think it's kind of that immigrant and farmer mentality that I was raised in within a multicultural, multilingual, multi-ethnic community that really made me see how medicine should be delivered. And I believe it starts at home, and it starts in the kitchen. It starts where you pray. It starts where you work out. It starts where you work. And ultimately, sadly, it usually ends in the hospitals or the doctor's offices. And so it's the paradigm shift that I've been trying to push for the last 20 years that has really given me the determination that eventually we will get there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on this show, so I've interviewed Dr. Arun Garg, and one of the things that he's talked about is like, it's really important to think about, where you eat and who you eat with and what you're eating. And, it's kind of down the line. And that's what I also hear in your intro, as well as a similar sort of theme that, this isn't just, all of a sudden you wind up sick, it all is tied to all the things that we're consuming all the time as well.
Yeah, and when I left academia, we can talk about this as well. I felt like we needed a fresh start, and that's the acronym of my company. Also, fresh was a word. I was, like I said, I was born was raised in the 80s in New York City, where this movement was happening called rap and hip hop, and at that time everything was fresh. You had a fresh haircut, you had fresh sneakers, you had a fresh jacket. And I thought that word, when you actually look at the definition, it's new, innovating, and hot. And I figured that's the last thing medicine is, right? And so I think medicine needed a fresh start. And my wife, who's a wordsmith, kind of made it into an acronym, and it stands for, I think, what we're all talking about here today. It's more than food is more than just medicine. I think it's wellness and well-being, and those 5 ingredients, fresh: food, relaxation, exercise, sleep, and happiness, is how we start every single clinical encounter with our patients, because I think that's really important. And we have found that if we address those 5 ingredients or those 5 pillars, of medicine is of less need, partly because you're showing the client or the patient the how. And I think that's really the goal. It's behavior change. It's how to change is really the key to success here.
Yeah. So maybe we should just take everybody back a little bit. So you're a trained clinician, but also, what was the initial inspiration for you to get your culinary degree?
People weren't listening to me enough as a doctor, and I'm not joking, but not joking, right? Since 2010, I've been teaching doctors how to cook. We started a series in 2010 called Doctors in the Kitchen. It was covered by the Wall Street Journal, and it's been great. I've taught, I don't even know, thousands of doctors and administrators and nurses and you name it, across the healthcare professions, on how to become more comfortable and using food as medicine, but also cooking as medicine. I thought was very important. But then I would go on, talk circuits, and I would speak a lot, and I would show up either in my suit or my white lab coat. And it was another kind of one of these things. And, this doctor's, nice guy, wants to teach us how to cook. And for a while there, people were saying, we're not chefs, we're doctors. But, we can talk about the lack of nutrition education in medical school and all that stuff too. But really, it was one picture of me teaching a bunch of hospital cooks within a large health system I was working. And there was a picture from above, and I think it's in my TED Talk. And I was the only guy there without your chef jacket on. And I was wearing this really cute apron. And I was like, man, no one's going to listen to me in this apron. I need to get a chef jacket. And so that was the day I decided that I wanted to trade in my lab coat for a chef whites and go through the formal training of being a chef. And what you're noticing, and what I've noticed, is that chefs are people that cook, and they are the people that have changed our behavior, how we eat, how we see food on our plate. And I think they also, I'd love to talk about this too, I think they also have a huge responsibility, and we're seeing that shift in restaurants as well, that there is a much more focus on health supportive. And that's why I went to the Natural Gourmet Institute, to learn more about the health supportive nature of cooking and choosing ingredients that are local, sustainable, delicious, ethnic, organic, instead of the traditional French culinary way of, using more butter, more fat, and more salt. So although those 3 things are delicious, it's not really the most advantageous for one's health. So I think, appearing as a chef allowed me the opportunity to get more people's ear. in this food as medicine movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely so critical. Um, and then, in terms of the inspiration for kind of the other parts of the acronym FRESH, what was the tie there? Where did you move from food to relaxation and exercise? And yeah, where
Sleep and
where did things broaden out?
So, for forever, my wife was a kind of a music, corporate music person. She used to work for Sony Music. And when I did get accepted to Harvard, she lost her job. She had to move up to Boston, and she lost her position within Sony here in New York. And she went on her own kind of wellness and spiritual path and journey, and became a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher. She's trained in aromatherapy. She did the integrative nutrition, health coaching certificate program. She was also trained in positive psychology. And I was watching her evolution, and then also coaching and working with clients. And, that's when we decided to join forces and really start this new type of medicine or new type of healthcare, called Fresh. And it's really, as a chef, doctor, my master's in public health was in clinical epidemiology, but with a focus on nutrition. My wife was a certified health coach from the Institute for Integrated Nutrition. We thought it would be good to start with food, right? But then I've been trained in mind body medicine. She's trained in mind body medicine. So relaxation became a second important factor. And she's a yoga teacher, so I thought exercise. I love to bike. We love to walk. So I thought exercise is really important. And sleep, you're as good as you sleep. And a lot of the research was coming out. And Ariana Huffington wrote this really important book, probably about 6-7 years ago, called The Sleep Revolution. That really kind of I realized there that sleep was, or insomnia or lack of good sleep was a healthcare epidemic as well. And then I think the most important, or equally important factor is happiness. And, it's in our Constitution, the pursuit of happiness, and it's based on positive psychology, this evolving field of well-being, what makes communities and people thrive. The example I always give is that someone gets the diagnosis of cancer and someone says, oh my God, I'm going to die. This is it. Versus the other person who gets a diagnosis of cancer says, this is my life calling and I'm going to change my life and I'm going to help others. And so I think our motto is pretty simple. When it comes to health, it starts with food. But at the end of the day, what we really, truly want in life is to be happy. And so it just happens to be a fresh acronym. And again, if you go back into traditional medicine, it's what all traditional doctors start their assessment with. They start with those 5 ingredients in different sort of verbiage and wordage, but that's basically how they assess a patient. And I would argue that very few doctors actually think about the broader perspective of wellness in that context.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your role as the Chief Health Officer at Performance Kitchen.
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting scenario, how that happened. So I was at a wellness conference, and the way life works sometimes. I was supposed to take an earlier flight, but it was canceled, and they needed someone to sit in as a moderator on a panel about food innovators. And they thought I would be a good moderator in that panel. And that led me to meet the ex-CEO of Luvo Foods, which then subsequently became Performance Kitchen, a woman named by Christine Day. And Luvo was around for a bit, and they were healthy, nutritious, organic frozen meals. And they were selling B2B, B2C to customers. And in fact, at one point, they were the food that you would get at Delta if you flew on Delta.
Okay.
And so there I am sitting and talking to these 3 very inspirational people who are trying to change the food system by introducing more healthy options. And at the end of that conference, Christine basically said, "I want you to get on our advisory board and help us kind of design our strategy forward." And at that time, I was noticing something happening. People were talking about food is medicine, and this is what the little change of how I believe it should be called. So food is medicine. I call it a movement. And it's been around since Hippocrates, 2,000 years, okay? But food as medicine, I consider the intervention, right? because we always talk about food is medicine, but we rarely think about it as medicine. Partly because, number one, I think medicine, it deprives itself of the beauty of food. It's more than just medicine. It's more than just a pill, right? And so that's one thing. But the other thing is that for us to kind of prescribe it like medicine, we have to test it as if it was medicine. And the only way to do that is through the scientific inquiry, through research. And as as a recovering health services researcher, I understand the importance of experimental studies, descriptive analyses, case controls, double-blind randomized controlled trials. I understand the whole kind of research landscape, but I thought we need to to move the field, we have to start investigating it. And at that point, there was a change in leadership with Luvo, and through many discussions, I felt that if we were going to be called a food as medicine company, we have to get into the game of seeing it as food as medicine and working with researchers and health institutions and healthcare institutions and health insurers who want to bend that cost curve of these preventable chronic diseases with a food first approach. And so as I became the chief health officer, we decided to pivot our strategy and focus more on the payers and the institutions that are delivering care or paying for the care, and to develop a medically tailored meal component to a healthy, delicious frozen food company called Performance Kitchen. And it's been great, for the past 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, that we've collaborated and worked with, and we're constantly looking for more health insurers and systems that really want to really put their money where the mouth is, right? If this is going to work, we have to treat it as medicine. But we can talk about some of the pros, cons, and all that other stuff about how to execute it. Because I think generally, most people are on the wagon that if you feed someone bad food, they're going to have bad health outcomes, right? Yeah. But the science is still, believe it or not, guys, it's still evolving, that if you feed people healthy food, people are going to get healthier.
So the opposite isn't necessarily true for some reason.
Right, exactly. We got 50 years of data saying that if you give people bad food, bad health outcomes. But we don't have is 50 years of data that if you provide healthy food for people, we're going to get a healthier society out of it. And so, but as you guys both know, you guys are both docs, you understand the scientific method, and that's part of the selling point, and particularly when you're speaking to health insurers and health institutions, and how do you get it? And as I was talking to you guys earlier, there's a great article out by a friend, Daphne Miller, today in the Washington Post to talk about this. I would argue that it is simple. I don't think it's so complicated. I think systems make it complicated. I don't think delivering people healthy, real food with nutritional value is that complicated. We just don't have the will to execute it in many ways. But I think the first institutions or the health insurance companies that really make it an effort, a genuine effort, to make this a covered benefit, so that if you actually have a chronic disease and it will be covered by your insurer, I believe that the research will just fall into line. And fortunately, there are a lot of good players in this game that are actually thinking about how to do this from a local, state, local, and even national level, which I always say, the kid from Queens getting invited to the White House Summit on food, hunger, nutrition doesn't get much bigger than that. So,
yeah,
it's coming. It's coming.
I think it's an interesting. I'll let you ask your question 1 second, Dr. Marotta, but I do think it's an interesting sort of contrast that my health insurer will pay for me to have a gym membership, but there's no sort of alignment around the food that I eat. I just wanted to add that little contrast because I was like, as you were speaking about it, I'm sitting here thinking, that I get subsidies. Let's just say subsidies paid for a health health place that I go to work out, but at the same time, there's nothing like that aligns to the food that I eat. So sorry, Dr. Marotta, for interrupting.
No, that's fine. Actually, our thinking is kind of in a similar vein. Obviously from a reimbursement perspective. So So most of the effort right now, or I guess support is around patients that then arguably are already dealing with a chronic disease state, and then the payers are reimbursing that. Are you seeing them shifting their mindset to more of a preventative modality too, where they'll actually subsidize access to healthier food, as part of a risk mitigation or prevention strategy?
Well, I think you're seeing companies that offer their own internal health insurance as a covered benefit because they covered those lives, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's exciting what's happening in, I think, in Medicaid and Medicare. Um, this is going to be a little long-winded, but it's why it's really important. And so CalAIM, Medicaid of California, is actually doing multiple demonstration projects, which we're one of the vendors involved, because again, it's a covered life. So Medicaid pays, right? The government pays for the health of the society. So therefore, they have to find ways to mitigate the risk or mitigate the loss, right? And so that's a covered life.
Yeah.
And that's why it's really exciting. Is it's sad in one part, but it's also very exciting. Is that most of these chronic diseases that are preventable and reversible by living a fresh lifestyle, particularly eating real food, mostly plants, not too much, like Marco Pollan always says. If Medicare covers this as a covered benefit, I think this will be a huge game changer in how we see the trajectory in the next 15 years amongst patients who are on Medicare. Because again, you're giving them food that is healthy. And as a chef, the number one complaint, the number one pushback I get, I have no time, I have no money, and no skill when it comes to food, right? And so therefore, oftentimes people say, well, you mean I met with someone not too long ago that said, what do you mean I have to pay for the insulin and the food for my diabetic employees? And I said, you don't understand. It was a doctor too. And I said, doctor, you don't understand. If you change how they eat and how they live, you don't have to pay for the insulin for the rest of their lives. And, this was a physician who just never saw it that way. And again, minds are like parachutes. They only work when they're open. And so therefore, I think once we start opening more minds on the power of food as medicine, I think the movement of food is medicine will be even more powerful.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is I've done demonstration projects with employers. And so companies have, and this is part of our other branch, Dr. Davis, about our Fresh Med, is that we actually have a university, partly because we started seeing people that own companies, CEOs, chief health officers, chief human resource officers, CFOs, saying that the cost of healthcare insurance is skyrocketing, unsustainable. 20% of our GDP, 20% of companies' profits are going to healthcare. And again, that's a covered life. And, by offering these corporate wellness benefits, which, work, but without changing the culture of the institution that you're working with, it's not going to be sustainable. And I think that's what we're all looking for, sustainable change. And so I also think there is a huge opportunity for businesses to get involved and to work with their insurers to offer these sort of benefits, as you were mentioning, Don, like coverage to your gym,
Right.
And I think that's, again, it's the established pragmatic dogma is established pragmatic dogma because it is the static pragmatic dogma, right? And to change that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing a lag in the adaptation of something that everyone really thinks it's the right thing to do. It's like, for me, it's like grandma's, puppies and babies, who doesn't like that, and I think that's, and for me, it becomes much more personable, much more real when one of your family members gets diagnosed with cancer or heart disease. Then it's a real thing, because now it's kind of ethereal. Yeah, we should be eating better. It's better for everyone's health. But it really becomes personal. And that's what happened to us. My father-in-law got diagnosed with stage 4 esophageal cancer. And he was admitted to a leading healthcare cancer institute here in the U.S. And the first meal they gave him was white bread, processed turkey, green jello, and a ginger ale. And this guy was in fulfillment liver failure secondary to stage 4 esophageal cancer.
Oh
And
my.
for me, that became, as Oprah says, my juice. I said, just to think about a kid in that same position. To me, again, I'm just waiting for people to just call, because it's the logical next step in this evolution of healthcare.
Yeah, I have seen healthcare providers come into a patient's room before, and my wife has experienced this where they just sort of remove a lot of things, and then you kind of think about your father-in-law going through that, and just sort of the ridiculous, I guess, nature of okay, so if you want to look at the roadmap of what might have gotten us started on our pathway here, a lot of those foods on the tray were good examples of that same thing.
Mm. And Anthony, I just want to answer your point, because you mentioned something about prevention. So one of the pilots that we're looking to do is, first of all, there's no money in prevention, right? Employers don't want to pay it, insurers don't want to pay it, because the average person, at least in the U.S., their insurance is tied to their job. Most people leave their jobs between 18 months to 3 years. So why am I going to pay for downstream effect, right? So that's the bigger problem, right? But the other thing, there are certain conditions, right? Gestational diabetes. That's one of the things that I'm really fascinated about, is because you not only have the opportunity to change the health trajectory of the mother, but you also have the potential to change the health trajectory of the unborn child.
Hmm.
And so we would love to do projects, and we were talking to someone in Texas about doing a pilot program among gestational diabetics. Listen, once the house is on fire, it's easy to call the fireman, right? It's, to your point,
Yeah,
Anthony, it's that prevention, right? When it's smoking, that's when you need to get involved. But again, I'm just a realist at this point in my life. There's no money in prevention, and until we as a society see the value of health promotion and prevention, from a funding point of view, it's not going to happen. That's why part of the reason why I'm getting involved more and more with Washington and policy, because I think you see the stroke of a pen is mightier than the stroke of us walking to, the healthy
true.
restaurant.
True. Yeah, and so obviously one thing that I'm seeing, but I'm curious to get your perspective on this as well, because the chef typically, where we're making things local, from scratch, fresh, yeah, it's great. But then when you look at kind of the average thing of what happens, for example, within the industry, everything is so highly processed, and so I wonder what your opinion is. Obviously, and even within the realm of the work that you guys are doing at Performance, is there a focus on trying to mitigate or minimize, processing as part of your, solution, like for those patients?
Yeah, so a friend of mine, I've done some work in Amsterdam, and this real cool guy he's a professor of taste. We all have doctorates, but
Hmm.
yeah, that's the coolest doctorate.
Yeah, yeah.
And he actually developed an acronym that I run with a little bit. He believes that for food has to be convenient, affordable, tasty, and I would also say sustainable. And I think that's the real conversation we should be having. We're starting to see that in market trends in the restaurant world, right? I'm not here to promote any sort of diet or any sort of lifestyle, but
Yeah.
when it comes to, in our model at Fresh, when it comes to food, we say eat more plants. That's simple. We don't really talk about meat, and if my suggestion, if you're going to eat meat, make sure it's good meat.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my stance on that. But we're seeing that chefs and culinary schools and hospital and hotels and other institutional foods are leaning into more plant-based meals, partly because we vote with our fork and people are wanting that, right? And we're also seeing that sold in our supermarkets. Um, be surprised that you may not know that the last thing I heard was that Walmart is the number one seller of organic produce now, which,
Hmm.
again, you think about that, it's mind blowing, right? And so it's not a rich thing, it's not a poor thing. I think it's the right thing. And I think the idea of having processed foods, and this is where, if there's any chefs online right now, chefs always come back to me, everything's processed. Well, yeah, kind of, but not to the extent of, as Michael Pollan again says, if you can't read it, don't eat it kind of philosophy. And again, processing, it just extends shelf stable, right? And things should rot, and that's why I think eating real food is, again, we overcomplicate the whole thing. And I think if we start eating more real food, and that's part of our mission as well. And the companies I also consult with, there's another company that I'm really interested in learning more about, partly because they stand behind the brand of eating healthy, local, organic produce, and animal proteins. And I think for us to call ourselves a health movement, we can't be selling that stuff. It's not healthy, particularly ultra processed foods.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Don and I have had this conversation as well. Just even with some of the emulsifiers that are out there and some of the impact in changing, gut diversity. I think, that for me, that's a pretty important area. I don't know what your perspective is on the whole microbiome movement and, leaky
Mm-hmm.
gut, or intestinal permeability,
Yeah.
aspect as well related to food.
Well, I think the science, I would say about 70. It's interesting. I'm still a clinician. I still see patients 1 to 2 days a week. Um, and it really focuses on, I guess, my specialty on evaluating the role of food and health, which um, happens in the gut. And so I had the great fortune of roughly 22 years ago, learning here in New York from one of the founders and fathers of um, functional integrated medicine called Leo Galland. And he kind of coined the term leaky gut. And I appreciate the fact that you guys call it intestinal permeability syndrome because it sounds a lot smarter. Um, but it's the same thing, which some of us have been saying for 20 years is the problem. And for me, it was that Scientific American paper that said you put someone on a standard American diet, a SAD diet, and you put them on a raw vegan diet, and within 3 days, the entire microbiome changes. If that's not enough power to tell you that, it's not that complicated, we just got to be eating the right foods. And everything has an effect. That's the thing too, right? Is that I don't think anything is necessarily good or bad. Maybe the only bad thing is maybe trans fats. But everything has a interaction with our own microbiome. And so we often hear the adage, we are what we eat, but we're truly what our microbiome eats. And if you want a healthy looking garden producing healthy fruits and vegetables and gases, and we have to put the good stuff in. There's no magic to this stuff, right? And oftentimes just talking about the microbiome, and I see a lot of people I use supplements to supplement, but we shouldn't be eating a diet full of supplements. And that's where I also think that a lot of the movement in the integrative and functional space is really diagnosing something that I think is real, not think it's real, is real, like intestinal permeability syndrome, and then restricting foods to the extent that you're breeding food eating disorders and abnormal food behaviors, and then throwing tons of supplements on them, instead of thinking about us as a agricultural part of the agricultural world where if you have a weedy garden, you got to kill the weeds before you start planting the good stuff in. And so although I love the idea of probiotics and prebiotics, I think we should be eating them instead of taking them as supplements as often as we prescribe them. And I think there's judicious use of antibiotics and steroids and PPIs. I think we also have to start thinking about what we should be putting in, but also we should be eliminating from what we put into our bodies, because eventually, as my wife always says, it shows up in some way or another. So I love the whole role of the microbiome. And in my practice 17 years ago, I doubled down on the role of the microbiome in just about everything. And thank God I was right about that one, because I would have been called a quack if I didn't. But yeah, it's real. It's real. Intestinal permeability is real. Gluten is bad for some people. Gluten is delicious for others. And so I think there's no bad guy in this game. We just have to find the foods that really either fuel us or hurt us.
Yeah, it's interesting whenever you watch like next generation sequencing and things like that, and you can see, where the DNA, just repeatedly doesn't match in the right spot. And whether all of that ties to the gut health and things like that, I think there's a lot more that the science has to play out here. But I think it ties to this whole idea that look, something's causing this that's happening to us, throughout time. And so to think about the future. What are your thoughts in terms of what the next decade might look like in terms of breakthroughs in food science?
Well, I've written about this as well. There's the majority of the money is going to food tech, right? And I wrote an article about this. Is that I think 97% of all money is going to the tech part of food tech. For me, maybe I'm more of a traditionalist. I think we have to go back to our roots, and I think science will only augment the ancient wisdom we have. It doesn't replace it. And I think, yeah, we want food faster. We want to deliver to our house. We want to order it before we even think about it, right? But again, someone has to cook it. Someone has to grow the foods that we cook. And I think I hope this field of, and it's a term that's out there. I'm just going to use it: regenerative farming. I think it's the old way of doing farming. I think that has to be explored. I feel that we have to, as a society, realize that we have the power to change what is on our shelves in our supermarkets and where we eat. And I think we just have to take ownership. Again, going back to the whole immigrant and farmer mentality, is that let's not wait for the next radical evolution, which will probably not be the best thing for our health. Let's go back to how, I guess, nature intended us to eat and live. And so I think using technology to further advance traditional food ways, I think I believe is going to be the future after multiple billions of dollars of failed experiments. And actually, I hope that something that came out of that Washington White House summit, two things that really kind of struck me is that we have the ability to end hunger. We just decided not to do it. So that's one thing that I think that really resonated with me, that, given all the technology, all the money, all the food that we grow, we can actually solve world hunger by 2030 or 2050. So that will lead to that will lead the world society as a ripple effect. The other thing, I think we have to start experimenting with more real food being offered to patients. I think food as medicine is going to be, I really do. I think food as medicine is going to be the evolution in the revolution that I think it has the potential to catalyze. But again, we have to choose the right people to do the right thing. And it goes back to the point that you were saying, Anthony, is that there's always that issue of scalability. And, can we give delicious, nutritious, healthy, real food to millions of people? I would say yes. I would actually say yes. And I think there's enough policymakers out there, there's enough farmers out there, there's enough patients, there's enough healthcare institutions that if we align our incentives, we can make that happen. But at the same time, we have competing interests, right? How do you do it bigger, better, and faster and cheaper? And that brings me back to a nursery rhyme that my mom told me about called Robin Hood. And Robin Hood never stole from the rich to give to the poor. He stole from the greedy to give to the needy. And I think that's an important thing to remember. It's not about, it's about greed and need. And I think, and that's part of the reason why I believe that we all have a role in our society to serve. And I think, what are you serving? I think that's how I wake up every morning. I'm very great. I have a lot of gratitude for the opportunity to serve, but how am I showing up? And I think that's where we have to take an internal look inside to see how we want to be seen as a society. And I think a lot of it has to do with corporate greed that gets in the way.
Dr. Marotta, do you have any other questions for Dr. Graham? I have some closing questions that I'd like to ask him before we get ready to wrap up here.
No, you know what? I'm good. We probably could talk for hours. So, I don't want
next time we'll do it over
occupy.
dinner. We'll do it over dinner next time.
Absolutely. No, it'd be my pleasure. So.
All right. So this starts my series of kind of final questions for you. So if somebody wanted to come to Performance Kitchen and be trained and things like that, how could they do that?
Well, just let me clear something. So Performance Kitchen is the company I work with that makes and delivers medically tailored meals.
Okay.
Right. So we're not a teaching center or anything else like that. Our Fresh Med U online platforms offer teaching classes, nutrition classes that augments the food.
Thank you.
If you want to learn about food and nutrition and cooking, go to Fresh Med U. And we have a free course too that I think will entice people. In terms of Performance Kitchen, if there are any healthcare institutions or health insurers that want to use this as a covered benefit, we will do a lot of the work. And part of it is, I think the unique proposition here is that there's a physician who's also a chef, who is a chief health officer. So I understand the complexities of healthcare delivery and some of the issues with execution regarding to HIPAA and compliance and patient confidentiality while giving patients food. But at the same time, also, you can be assured that anything I make tastes delicious. And that's the guarantee of a chef, right? So trust me, I'm the doctor, I'll take care of you. But trust me, I'm a chef, it's going to be delicious.
There you
I
go.
love that.
All right. So my last question before we got started, you said that everything was ready for you to eat dinner tonight. You want to share with us what you're about to cook?
Yeah, perfect. So today I literally went to the farmer's market to pick greens. So I picked greens. I got greens. I don't know. I'm looking over there because my kitchen's not there. But I got my mixed field greens. I have radishes, which were amazing today. Um, Carrots, and I also use the carrot tops, by the way.
Oh,
Don't throw away those carrot tops. They add a little bit of the carrot flavor and give you a little bit more greens. I have cucumbers, and I make a homemade Italian vinaigrette, and I also make a delicious half whole wheat, half all-purpose flour pizza. So we're having pizza and salad tonight for dinner.
very nice.
Nice.
Very nice. Well,
Yeah.
thank you
Sounds
very.
delicious.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Now
next time come over to the house and we'll do this over dinner. I think we should do a podcast over dinner.
That would be
I
great.
like that.
Yeah,
I'd
I've
love
got
to
the
do that.
remote set up. I can move it anywhere, so no
And
problem.
we got 3 docs. We could call the doc dishes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, very much, Dr. Graham, for joining us, and thank you very much as well, Dr. Marotta, for supporting the interview, and it was great to have this conversation. So thanks so much.
Thanks for the invite, guys.
Thanks.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. Thanks, Robert. Take care. Cheers.
You're very welcome. Take care.
Thanks.
Cheers.